The wreckage of the Mercedes was still smoking when the first responders arrived. Shattered glass glittered across the rain-slicked pavement of Brickell Avenue like diamonds, and the smell of burning rubber mixed with the metallic scent of blood. Isabella Moretti sat trapped in the driver's seat, her vision blurring as she watched her phone screen light up one more time with her husband's name. Except he wasn't calling her. She was calling him. Her fingers were slick with blood as she pressed redial for the 4th time, each movement sending white-hot pain through her ribs. The airbag had deployed, but not before her body had been thrown against the door when the black SUV had slammed into her at the intersection. She could taste copper in her mouth, could feel warmth spreading across her abdomen in a way that terrified her more than the twisted metal surrounding her. "Come on, Dante," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of approaching sirens. Please answer." The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. "You've reached Dante Moretti. Leave a message." Isabella's hand dropped, the phone falling into her lap as tears mixed with the blood on her face. Through the cracked windshield, she could see firefighters rushing toward her car, their mouths moving, their hands gesturing. But all she could hear was the ringing in her ears and the echo of her husband's recorded voice, the only part of him she'd been able to reach for the past 3 hours. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" A firefighter's face appeared at her window, his expression shifting from professional concern to alarm as he assessed the damage. "Ma'am, we're gonna get you out. Just stay still, okay?" But Isabella couldn't stay still. Her hand fumbled for the phone again, her wedding ring catching the light from the emergency vehicles. She had to try one more time. Had to make him understand that this wasn't like the other times she'd called, wasn't about their fight or her loneliness or the distance that had grown between them like a canyon. This time, she was dying. And Dante Moretti, the most powerful man in Miami's underworld, the man who controlled everything from South Beach to the port of Miami, the man who had promised to protect her from all harm, he was somewhere across the city with another woman, too busy to answer his wife's last call. 3 hours earlier. The morning had started like any other morning in the Moretti household, which was to say it had started with Isabella waking up alone. She'd reached across the California king bed out of habit, her hand finding only cold sheets where her husband should have been. The pillow beside hers was undented, the covers undisturbed. Dante hadn't come home again. Isabella sat up slowly, wincing at the familiar ache in her chest that had nothing to do with physical pain. The floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse offered a stunning view of Biscayne Bay, the morning sun turning the water into liquid gold. From up here, Miami looked like paradise. From up here, you couldn't see the cracks in the foundation of her marriage. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Dante, sent at 4:47 a.m. Meeting ran late. Staying at the Mondrian. Don't wait up. Isabella stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. There were so many things she wanted to say. She wanted to ask which meeting required him to stay at a hotel instead of coming home. She wanted to ask why he hadn't called instead of texting. She wanted to ask when he'd stopped caring whether she waited up or not. Instead, she typed, "Okay. See you tonight?" The message showed as delivered, then read, but no response came. Isabella set the phone down and walked to the bathroom, catching sight of herself in the mirror. At 28, she should have been in her prime. Instead, her dark hair hung limp around her shoulders, and her brown eyes, once bright with hope, had dulled to something resigned. She knew the answer. It had been gradual, like watching the tide slowly erode a beach. 3 years of marriage to Dante Moretti had taught her that loving a powerful man meant accepting his absence. Charity galas where he ignored her. Dinners alone. Empty beds while he handled business, the word that had become code for everything she wasn't allowed to know. Isabella turned on the shower, letting the bathroom fill with steam. As she stepped under the hot water, she tried to remember the man she'd married. Dante had been different then, attentive, passionate, almost obsessive in his devotion. He'd courted her with an intensity that had been thrilling and slightly terrifying, showing up at the restaurant where she waitressed with roses, expensive gifts, promises of a life beyond her wildest dreams. Her parents had warned her. "The Moretti family is dangerous, Mija," her mother had said, tears in her eyes. "That world, it will destroy you." But Isabella had been young and naive and so desperate to escape her cramped apartment in Little Havana that danger had seemed romantic. Dante had seemed romantic. He'd offered her everything: security, luxury, a place in Miami's elite social circles. She just hadn't realized that the price would be herself. After her shower, Isabella dressed in yoga pants and a silk camisole, her uniform for days spent alone. She wandered through their penthouse, the beautiful space that had never felt warm. Dante's home, not hers. She was just living in it. In the kitchen, Rosa, their housekeeper, was already preparing breakfast. "Buenos dias, Señora Moretti," Rosa said with a gentle smile. "I made your favorite fresh fruit and yogurt." "Thank you, Rosa." Isabella slid onto a bar stool at the kitchen island, watching the older woman work. Rosa had been with the Moretti family for 20 years, had probably seen more of Dante's life than Isabella ever would. "Did Mr. Moretti say when he'd be home?" Isabella asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Rosa's hands paused in their work, just for a moment. "He didn't mention anything to me, Signora." The careful neutrality in Rosa's tone told Isabella everything. Rosa knew. The entire household staff probably knew. When your husband didn't come home, when he sent texts instead of making calls, when he looked through you instead of at you, everyone noticed. Isabella picked at her breakfast, her stomach churning with a familiar mixture of anxiety and resignation. She needed to do something today. Needed to get out of this penthouse before the walls closed in completely. Maybe she'd go to the gallery in Wynwood she'd been meaning to visit. Maybe she'd have lunch with her sister, Sophia. Maybe she'd... Her phone rang, and her heart leaped. Dante. But when she looked at the screen, it was an unknown number. "Hello? Mrs. Moretti? This is Dr. Chen from Miami Women's Health Center. I'm calling with the results of your blood work from last week." Isabella's grip tightened on the phone. She'd gone to the doctor after weeks of exhaustion and nausea, thinking she had the flu or maybe stress-related illness. The doctor had run a full panel, just to be thorough. "Yes, Dr. Chen. What did you find?" There was a pause, and Isabella could hear papers rustling. "Mrs. Moretti, you're pregnant. About 6 weeks along based on your hormone levels." The kitchen tilted sideways. Isabella gripped the counter, her knuckles turning white. "Pregnant?" she whispered. "Yes. Congratulations. I'd like to schedule you for a first prenatal appointment too. I need to call you back." Isabella interrupted, her mind spinning. "I'm sorry, I need to call you back." She hung up before Dr. Chen could respond. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Dante's child. Isabella's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, flat and unremarkable beneath her silk top. There was a baby growing inside her. Their baby. The baby she'd dreamed about since their wedding day, back when she'd still believed a child might bridge the growing distance between them. But now? Now she wasn't sure if she should be thrilled or terrified. "Signora?" Rosa's concerned voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "Are you all right? You look very pale." "I'm fine," Isabella said automatically, then realized it was pointless to lie. Rosa would figure it out eventually. Everyone would. I need to call Dante." She grabbed her phone and pulled up Dante's number, her hands trembling. This was important. This was the kind of news that required an actual conversation, not a text message. This was the kind of news that might finally bring him home. The phone rang, and went to voicemail. Isabella tried again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. She sent a text instead. "Dante, I need to talk to you. It's important. Please call me." Delivered. Read. No response. Isabella stared at the phone, feeling something crack open inside her chest. She was pregnant, and her husband wouldn't even answer her call. "Rosa," she said quietly, "I'm going out. I need some air." "Signora, are you sure? You don't look well." "I'm fine. I just need to think." Isabella grabbed her purse and keys, fleeing the penthouse before Rosa could argue. She took the elevator down to the parking garage, her mind a chaotic mess of emotions. Pregnant. She was pregnant. She should be happy. She should be calling her mother, her sister, planning nurseries and baby showers. Instead, she felt like she was drowning. In the parking garage, she slid into her silver Mercedes, a birthday gift from Dante last year, back when he still remembered her birthday. She started the engine and pulled out onto Brickell Avenue, not sure where she was going, just knowing she needed to move. The Miami streets blurred past her. She drove aimlessly through downtown, past the glittering high-rises and luxury boutiques, past the tourists snapping photos and the business people rushing to meetings. Her phone sat in the cup holder, silent and accusatory. Dante still hadn't called back. Isabella found herself heading toward Coconut Grove, toward the small park near the water where she and Dante had had their first date. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. He'd been so attentive then, asking about her dreams, her hopes, her fears. He'd listened like she was the most fascinating person in the world. When had he stopped listening? She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the red light. Almost. Isabella slammed on the brakes, her Mercedes screeching to a stop just inches from the intersection. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched cross-traffic zoom past. That was close. Too close. She needed to focus. Needed to. Her phone rang. Finally. Finally, Dante was calling her back. Isabella grabbed the phone with one hand, her eyes still on the traffic light. She didn't even look at the screen before answering. Dante, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Mrs. Moretti? An unfamiliar female voice cut through her relief. This is Nina, calling from La Perla restaurant. Your reservation for tonight is confirmed for 8 p.m. Mr. Moretti requested our private dining room and asked us to confirm the special arrangements. Isabella's blood turned to ice. What reservation? There was a pause. The reservation for 2? Mr. Moretti made it last week for tonight. He was very specific about the privacy and the champagne selection. I see. Isabella's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. Thank you for confirming. She hung up and stared at the phone in her hand. A romantic dinner reservation at Miami's most exclusive restaurant. Champagne. A private dining room. But he hadn't mentioned anything to her about dinner plans. Because the reservation wasn't for her, the light turned green. Cars. Behind Isabella started honking, but she couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The phone screen was still lit up, and before she could stop herself, she was opening Dante's location, sharing a feature she'd activated months ago during one of her paranoid moments. A feature he'd never bothered to turn off because he probably assumed she'd never check it. His location popped up immediately. The Mondrian Hotel, South Beach. The same hotel he'd texted her from this morning. The same hotel he'd supposedly spent the night at after a late meeting. Isabella's hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped the phone. With mechanical precision, she switched to his credit card statements. Another thing she had access to. Another thing he'd never thought to hide because he'd never expected her to look. The charges from the past month painted a clear picture. Multiple stays at luxury hotels across Miami. Charges at jewelry stores she'd never received gifts from. Restaurant bills for 2 at places they'd never gone together. And this morning there was a charge at the Mondrian Spa. A couple's massage at 10 a.m. While she'd been sitting alone in their penthouse, eating breakfast alone, finding out she was pregnant alone, he'd been at a spa with another woman. The honking behind her grew more insistent. Isabella barely noticed. She was scrolling now, pulling up Dante's social media, his photos, anything that might tell her how long this had been going on, how blind she'd been. That's when she saw it. A tagged photo from last night, posted by someone named Valentina Russo. The location? Mondrian, South Beach. The image showed a woman's hand holding a champagne glass, expensive rings glittering on her fingers, and in the background, partially visible, was a man's watch, a distinctive Patek Philippe with a black face and gold band. The same watch Isabella had given Dante for their 2nd anniversary. The same watch he was wearing in the photo that had been taken at midnight last night. She clicked on Valentina's profile with numb fingers. The woman was beautiful, model beautiful, with long black hair, dramatic makeup, and a body poured into designer clothes. Her Instagram was full of luxury, yachts, private jets, expensive restaurants, and scattered throughout the past 6 months were subtle hints of a man who was never fully in frame. A man's hand on the small of her back, a man's jacket draped over a chair, a shadow in a doorway. A man who was clearly Dante. The honking turned into shouting. Someone was screaming at her to move, but Isabella couldn't. She was frozen, watching her marriage dissolve in a series of Instagram posts and credit card charges, and lies upon lies upon lies. If you're invested in Isabella's story, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who loves emotional drama. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Her phone buzzed with a text. This time it was from Dante. Can't talk now. Whatever it is can wait until tonight. I'll be home late. He wasn't coming home. He was going to La Perla with Valentina. He was going to spend another night at another hotel while his wife, his pregnant wife, waited at home. Something inside Isabella snapped. She wasn't going to wait anymore. She wasn't going to be the obedient, ignorant wife who pretended not to notice. She was going to confront him. She was going to drive to that hotel right now. And the impact came from nowhere. 1 second, Isabella was putting the car in gear, her vision blurred with tears and rage. The next second, metal was screaming and glass was exploding and her body was being thrown sideways with impossible force. She didn't even see the black SUV that ran the red light, didn't see the driver's face as he slammed into her door at 50 miles per hour. Didn't see anything except the world spinning, tumbling, everything going white and red and dark. When the motion stopped, Isabella found herself pinned in the driver's seat, the door crushed inward, the steering wheel bent at an unnatural angle. Pain radiated through her entire body, sharp and overwhelming. She couldn't feel her left leg, couldn't move her left arm, could taste blood in her mouth, hot and metallic. Her phone had been thrown somewhere in the impact. She could see it on the passenger floorboard, the screen cracked but still glowing. With her right hand, the only limb that seemed to work, Isabella reached for it. The movement sent agony shooting through her ribs, made her vision gray at the edges. But she had to reach it, had to call someone, had to get help. Her fingers closed around the phone. She pulled it toward her, leaving a smear of blood across the leather seat. Through the shattered windshield, she could see people gathering. Someone was calling 911. Someone else was taking photos. But all Isabella could think about was Dante. She needed to call Dante. She needed him to know that this time it wasn't something that could wait. With shaking, blood-slicked fingers, she pulled up his contact and pressed call. The phone rang, and went to voicemail. Dante Moretti stood on the balcony of the Mondrian penthouse suite, looking out over South Beach as the afternoon sun painted the ocean in shades of gold. Behind him, through the open sliding door, he could hear Valentina in the shower, humming something off-key and cheerful. His phone buzzed against his thigh, Isabella calling again, and he declined the call without looking at it. He'd deal with his wife later. Right now, he had bigger problems. The meeting last night with the Colombians had gone badly. They were demanding a larger cut of the port operations, threatening to take their business to the Russians if Dante didn't comply. He'd spent the night strategizing with his advisors, running numbers, trying to figure out how to maintain his territory without looking weak. The fact that the meeting had stretched until dawn, that he'd decided to stay at the hotel instead of going home, that was just good business sense. Efficient. That Valentina had been here waiting for him when the meeting ended was just convenience. Dante took a long drink of his whiskey, trying to ignore the guilt that had been gnawing at him for weeks now. Months, if he was honest with himself. Valentina had started as a distraction, a way to forget about the pressure and the violence and the constant threat that came with running Miami's underworld. She was fun and uncomplicated, and never asked difficult questions. She was everything Isabella wasn't. Not that there was anything wrong with Isabella. His wife was beautiful, educated, loyal. She came from a good Cuban family, made the right impression at social events, stayed out of his business. She was exactly what a man in his position needed, a respectable wife who didn't cause problems. But somewhere along the way, respectable had become boring. Loyal had become clingy. Her constant need for attention, for conversation, for connection, it exhausted him. With Valentina, he could just be. No expectations, no disappointments, no guilt about coming home late or missing dinner or forgetting anniversaries, except for the guilt that came from cheating on his wife. Dante's phone buzzed again. Isabella. He declined it again. Whatever she wanted could wait. She was probably just upset about last night's argument, the same argument they'd been having in different variations for months now. She wanted more of his time, more of his attention, more. She didn't understand that his time and attention were the resources that kept her safe, kept her living in luxury, kept her fed and clothed and protected. Dante? Valentina appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a hotel robe, her wet hair trailing water down her back. Come back to bed. You've been stressed all day. He turned to look at her. At 25, Valentina was beautiful in an obvious way, the kind of beauty that turned heads in clubs and restaurants. She knew how to dress, how to move, how to make a man feel like the most important person in the world. But as Dante looked at her now, framed in the doorway of a hotel suite he'd paid for with money from his criminal empire, he felt a twinge of something uncomfortable. Something that might have been shame, if he'd let himself acknowledge it. I need to make some calls, he said, turning back to the ocean view. You always need to make calls. Valentina's voice carried a hint of petulance. You promised me today. You promised we'd have lunch at La Perla tonight. La Perla. The reservation Nina had called to confirm. The reservation Isabella had somehow found out about, based on the 17 text messages he'd been ignoring all afternoon. His phone buzzed again. For God's sake, Dante muttered, pulling it out. What is so important that... But it wasn't Isabella calling this time. It was Marco, his second in command. Dante answered immediately. What is it? Boss, we have a situation. Marco's voice was tight with tension. It's about Mrs. Moretti. Dante's entire body went rigid. What about her? There's been an accident. A bad one. On Brickell and 7th. Her Mercedes was hit by an SUV. The first responders are saying... Marco paused, and Dante could hear sirens in the background. They're saying it's bad, boss. She's trapped in the vehicle. They're trying to cut her out now. The whiskey glass slipped from Dante's fingers, shattering on the marble balcony. What hospital? His voice didn't sound like his own. They're taking her to Jackson Memorial. But Dante, there's more. The witnesses are saying she was stopped at a green light when the SUV hit her. She was just sitting there, not moving. Like she was distracted or something. And the SUV... Marco's voice dropped lower. The SUV had no plates. The driver fled on foot. This wasn't an accident. The words hit Dante like physical blows. Not an accident. Someone had hit Isabella intentionally. Someone had targeted his wife. And he'd been ignoring her calls all afternoon. I'm on my way, Dante said, already moving toward the door. Dante? Valentina's voice followed him. What's wrong? What happened? He didn't answer. He was already running. The drive from South Beach to Jackson Memorial Hospital should have taken 20 minutes. Dante made it in 12, his Maserati weaving through traffic at speeds that would have gotten anyone else arrested. But the Miami police knew his car, knew his face, and knew better than to pull over Dante Moretti when he was driving like a man possessed. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Marco calling with updates. His lawyer calling about the investigation. His mother calling after hearing the news through the family grapevine. Dante ignored them all. The only call he wanted needed was the one that wouldn't come. Isabella couldn't call him back because Isabella was being cut out of a crushed Mercedes by firefighters with the jaws of life. Because someone had tried to kill her. Because he'd been too busy with his mistress to answer when she needed him. Dante's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The guilt that had been a quiet whisper all afternoon was now a screaming accusation in his head. He'd declined her calls. Multiple calls. While she was driving, while she was in danger, while she was. His phone buzzed with a text from Marco. She's out of the vehicle. Paramedics taking her in now. Still alive but critical. Still alive. The words should have been comforting, but all Dante heard was the still. As in, not for long. As in, you might be too late. He abandoned the Maserati in a loading zone at the hospital, not bothering to lock it. Let someone steal it. Let the police tow it. None of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was getting to Isabella before... Before what? Before she died thinking her husband didn't care enough to answer her calls? Before she slipped away without hearing him say he was sorry? Before he lost the one person who had ever loved him for something other than his power and money? The emergency room was chaos. Dante pushed through the automatic doors, his expensive suit and commanding presence immediately drawing attention from the staff. He spotted a nurse at the intake desk and strode toward her, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. Isabella Moretti. My wife. She was just brought in from a car accident. The nurse's eyes widened with recognition, whether from his name or his face. Dante didn't know and didn't care. Mr. Moretti, yes. Your wife is in Trauma Bay 3. Dr. Santos is with her now. If you'll just wait here. Where is Trauma Bay 3? Dante's tone made it clear waiting wasn't an option. Sir, you can't just... Where is my wife? The nurse swallowed hard and pointed down a corridor. Through those doors. Take a left. But Mr. Moretti, you need to understand. Dante was already moving. He burst through the doors marked authorized personnel only and followed the sound of urgent voices and beeping machines. The hospital's sterile smell, antiseptic, and blood and fear made his stomach churn. He'd been in hospitals before, usually visiting men who'd been on the wrong end of his business decisions. But this was different. This was Isabella. Trauma Bay 3 was surrounded by medical personnel in blue scrubs, all moving with practiced urgency. Through the gaps between bodies, Dante caught glimpses of his wife on the gurney, There was so much blood. Her dark hair was matted with it, her clothes soaked through. Her face, her beautiful face, was bruised and swollen, barely recognizable. Pressure dropping. Need to get her to surgery now. Internal bleeding, possible spleen rupture. Where the hell is the blood? She needs O negative. A doctor looked up and spotted Dante. Are you family? I'm her husband. The words came out rough, almost broken. The doctor's expression shifted to something between sympathy and urgency. Dr. Santos, your wife has sustained severe trauma. Multiple rib fractures, collapsed lung, significant internal bleeding. We need to get her to surgery immediately. But I need your consent and I need to know, is she pregnant? The question hit Dante like a bullet to the chest. What? Her HCG levels are elevated. She's approximately 6 weeks pregnant. The fetus may not be viable given the trauma, but we need to know if you were aware. Pregnant. Isabella was pregnant. They were going to have a baby, and Dante had been ignoring her calls all day. I didn't know, he whispered, his legs suddenly unsteady. She was trying to tell me. She kept calling and his voice broke. I didn't answer. Doctor? Santos's expression softened fractionally. Mr. Moretti, I need you to focus. Your wife is critical. We need to operate now to stop the internal bleeding, but there's a significant risk to both her and the pregnancy. I need your consent to proceed. Do whatever it takes to save her. Dante's voice was steel now, commander returning even through the shock. Whatever it takes. We'll do our best. Dr. Santos turned back to his team. Let's move. Get her to OR2. Page Dr. Reyes from OBGYN. We need to monitor fetal viability during the procedure. They were wheeling Isabella away, moving fast, her body lost in a tangle of IV lines and monitoring equipment. Dante started to follow, but a nurse stepped in front of him. Sir, you can't go with her. There's a surgical waiting room on the 3rd floor. Someone will update you as soon as we know more. I need to see her. I need to tell her. She's unconscious, Mr. Moretti, but you can see her after surgery. For now, the best thing you can do is let us work. Dante stood frozen in the corridor, watching them wheel his wife away, watching her disappear through a set of double doors. The doors swung shut behind her with a finality that made his chest constrict. She'd been calling him, trying to reach him. And he'd declined every single attempt because he'd been too busy, too distracted, too wrapped up in his own selfish needs to realize his wife was in danger. His pregnant wife. The rage that flooded through Dante was cold and deadly. Someone had done this. Someone had targeted Isabella, had run her off the road, had tried to kill her and their unborn child. And when he found out who, he would show them exactly why people feared the Moretti name. But first, he needed to make sure Isabella survived. Dante's phone rang. Marco again. Talk to me, Dante answered. Boss, I've got information about the accident. The SUV was reported stolen this morning, found abandoned near the port. Wiped clean, professional job. Marco paused. We pulled Isabella's phone records. She called you 17 times before the crash. The last 4 were from her car. 17 calls. What was she calling about? Dante's voice was hollow. I don't know, boss. But whatever it was, she really needed to reach you. To tell him she was pregnant. To tell him she'd found out about Valentina. To tell him God. What else? What had been so important that she'd called 17 times? Find out who did this, Dante said, his voice dropping to the dangerous quiet that made men nervous. Pull every resource we have. Check traffic cameras, witness statements, everything. Someone ordered this hit, and I want to know who. Already on it. But Dante, there's another problem. The Colombians are saying they had nothing to do with it. The Russians, too. Everyone's denying involvement, which means it's someone close. Dante's mind was already racing through the possibilities. Someone who knew Isabella's movements. Someone who knew she'd be vulnerable. Your location's been public all day, boss. Everyone knows you were at the Mondrian. If someone wanted to send a message, they'd go after my wife while I was distracted. Dante slammed his fist against the wall, leaving a dent in the plaster. This is my fault. I left her exposed. We'll find them, Marco promised. And when we do, I want them alive. Dante's tone was ice. I want to look them in the eye when I ask them why they thought they could touch what's mine. He ended the call and stood in the empty corridor, his reflection staring back at him from the polished floor. He looked like a man who had everything expensive, Suit, designer watch, the kind of confidence that came from controlling an empire. But the truth was, he'd had everything, and he'd been too stupid to realize it. Isabella had been his from the moment he'd first seen her 3 years ago, waiting tables at that little Cuban restaurant in Little Havana. She'd been 25, fresh out of community college, trying to save money to help her mother. She'd looked at him with those warm brown eyes and smiled. And Dante had known in that instant that she was going to be his. He'd courted her properly, or as properly as a man like him could. Flowers, dinners, long conversations about her dreams and hopes. He'd seen in her something pure, something untouched by the violence and corruption that defined his world. She'd been an escape, a reminder that beauty and goodness still existed. And then he'd married her, and promptly started destroying everything that had drawn him to her in the first place. He'd isolated her from her family, telling himself it was for their safety. He'd controlled her movements, telling himself it was for her protection. He'd kept her ignorant of his business, telling himself it was to preserve her innocence. And somewhere along the way, he'd started seeing her as just another possession to be managed rather than a person to be loved. When had that happened? When had his wife become an obligation instead of a choice? Mr. Moretti? Dante looked up to find a young woman in a police uniform approaching him. Detective shield on her belt. Detective Ramirez, Miami PD. She pulled out a notebook. I need to ask you some questions about your wife's accident. Not now. I'm afraid it can't wait, Mr. Moretti. This wasn't an accident, it was attempted murder. And given your, business associations, we need to determine if this was a targeted attack. Dante's laugh was bitter. You think I don't know my wife was targeted? You think I need the police to tell me someone just tried to kill her? Detective Ramirez's expression remained neutral. Where were you today between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m.? Are you seriously asking me for an alibi? I'm asking everyone close to Mrs. Moretti to account for their whereabouts. Standard procedure in attempted murder cases. Dante could have told her the truth that he'd been in bed with his mistress while his pregnant wife was calling him for help. But the truth would open doors he couldn't afford to have opened. Right now. I was in a business meeting at the Mondrian. My associate Marco Castellano can confirm. What kind of business? The legal kind. Dante's tone made it clear the questioning was over. Now, if you'll excuse me, my wife is in surgery. One more question. Does your wife have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt her? That was the question that haunted Dante. Isabella didn't have enemies. She was kind, generous, naive to the point of being dangerous. She fed stray cats and gave money to homeless people and volunteered at the children's hospital. The only enemies she had were his enemies, people who might hurt her to get to him. Which meant this was his fault. No, he said finally. My wife doesn't have enemies, but I do. And someone just made the mistake of thinking they could touch her to hurt me. Detective Ramirez studied his face. Mr. Moretti, if you know something about who did this, when I find out who did this, you'll be the first to know. The lie came easily, because I'll be delivering them to your doorstep in a body bag. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The surgical waiting room on the 3rd floor was empty except for Marco, who'd arrived while Dante was being questioned. His second-in-command stood when Dante entered, his face grim. Any news? She's still in surgery. They said it could be hours. Dante sank into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, his head in his hands. She's pregnant, Marco. Isabella's pregnant and I didn't even know. Marco was silent for a moment. That's what she was calling about? Probably. Along with... Dante couldn't finish the sentence. Along with the fact that she'd discovered his affair. Along with the fact that he'd destroyed their marriage. Along with 17 other things he'd never know because he'd been too self-absorbed to answer. We'll get through this, boss. Isabella's strong. But was she? Dante had spent 3 years breaking down his wife's strength, isolating her, making her dependent on him, all while telling himself it was for her protection. His phone buzzed. A text from Valentina. Where are you? You left so fast. Is everything okay? Dante stared at the message, disgust rising in his throat. While Isabella was fighting for her life in an operating room, while their unborn child's fate hung in the balance, his mistress was texting him like he'd just stepped out for cigarettes. He blocked her number without responding. Marco, I need you to do something for me. Anything, boss. The Mondrian suite. Everything in it needs to disappear. Clothes, jewelry, any trace that someone else was staying there. Make it look like I was alone. Marco's face remained carefully neutral. Consider it done. And Valentina Russo pay her off. Whatever it takes to make her go away quietly. I don't want her name anywhere near this situation. You ending it? It never should have started. Dante leaned back in the chair, exhaustion and guilt weighing on him like physical burdens. I convinced myself Isabella didn't need me, that she was fine being kept separate from my life. Truth is, I was keeping her separate because it was easier than being a real husband, easier than coming home every night, easier than actually trying to build something real. She loves you, Marco said quietly. Everyone can see it. She loved me, Dante corrected, past tense. And I threw it away for what? For excitement? For escape? For a woman who doesn't even know me? Before Marco could respond, the surgical doors swung open. Dr. Santos emerged, still in his scrubs, pulling down his mask. Dante was on his feet instantly, his heart hammering. How is she? Dr. Santos's expression was guarded. Your wife survived the surgery. We repaired the splenic laceration and reinflated her collapsed lung. She has multiple rib fractures, a fractured clavicle, and significant soft tissue damage, but barring infection or complications, she should make a full physical recovery. Dante heard the hesitation in the doctor's voice. And the baby? Dr. Santos took a breath. Mr. Moretti, I'm sorry. Your wife lost the pregnancy. The trauma was too severe. There was nothing we could do. The words hit Dante like a physical blow. Lost the pregnancy. Their baby. The baby he hadn't even known existed until an hour ago was gone. Does she know? His voice came out hoarse. She hasn't regained consciousness yet. When she does, we'll need to tell her. I'm very sorry for your loss. Doctor. Santos left, and Dante stood frozen in the waiting room, processing information his brain didn't want to accept. Isabella had survived, but their baby hadn't. She'd been trying to call him to share the news of her pregnancy, and he'd ignored her. And now there was no pregnancy to celebrate, just loss and grief and questions about whether things might have been different if he'd answered just one of those 17 calls. Boss, Marco's voice was gentle. This isn't your fault, but it was. Maybe Dante hadn't been driving the SUV that hit Isabella's car, but he'd created the circumstances that led to it. His business, his enemies, his choices, they'd all combined to put his wife in danger. And when she'd needed him most, when she'd been scared and alone and trying to reach him, he'd been too busy with another woman to care. When can I see her? Dante asked, his voice hollow. Dr. Santos said she's being moved to ICU. They'll let you know when she's settled. Dante nodded numbly and sank back into the chair, waiting, always waiting. He'd spent 3 years making Isabella wait for him to come home, wait for his attention, wait for him to remember she existed. Now it was his turn to wait and hope that when she woke up, she'd give him a chance to explain. Though what explanation could possibly be enough? It was nearly midnight when they finally let Dante see her. The ICU was quiet, machines beeping in steady rhythms that somehow made the silence more profound. A nurse led him to Isabella's room, her footsteps squeaking on the linoleum. She's stable but still sedated, the nurse explained in a whisper. The anesthesia should wear off in the next few hours. We're monitoring her closely for any complications. Dante barely heard her. His entire focus was on the figure in the hospital bed. Isabella looked impossibly small, surrounded by all the medical equipment. Tubes and wires connected her to machines that monitored her heart rate, oxygen levels, blood pressure. Her face was a battlefield of bruises, purple and yellow spreading across her cheek and jaw. A bandage wrapped around her head where they'd stitched a laceration. Her left arm was in a cast, her torso wrapped in bandages to stabilize her broken ribs. But she was breathing. Her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, and that was enough to make Dante's knees weak with relief. He pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down carefully, as if sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. His hand reached out, hovering over hers, afraid to touch her and cause more pain. Isabella, he whispered. I'm here. I'm so sorry I wasn't there before, but I'm here now. No response. Just the steady beep of the heart monitor and the soft hiss of oxygen flowing through her nasal cannula. Dante had faced down rival crime families, had stared down the barrel of guns, had made decisions that determined whether men lived or died. But sitting here, watching his broken wife breathe, he felt more helpless than he ever had in his life. They told me about the baby, he continued, his voice cracking. About our baby. Isabella, I'm so sorry. If I had known, if I had just answered your calls. But what? Would it have changed anything? Would Isabella have been home safe if he'd picked up the phone? Or would she have been so upset by discovering his affair that she'd still ended up in that intersection at that exact moment? There was no way to know. No way to rewrite the past 12 hours. All Dante could do was sit here and wait for his wife to wake up so he could try to explain the inexplicable. The hours crawled by. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications, making notes on charts. Dawn light began filtering through the window, painting the room in shades of gray and pale gold. And still Isabella slept, her face peaceful despite the violence her body had endured. Dante didn't leave, didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't check his phone. For the first time in 3 years, there was nowhere else he wanted to be. No meeting more important than this moment. No business more critical than watching his wife breathe. Around 7 a.m., Isabella's fingers twitched. Dante was on his feet instantly, leaning over the bed. Isabella, can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered. A soft moan escaped her lips. Then, slowly, painfully, her eyes opened. For a moment, she seemed confused, her gaze unfocused as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. Then her eyes found Dante's face, and something flickered in their depths. Recognition, then memory, then something that looked like devastation. Dante, she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed hours ago. I'm here. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away, the movement small but deliberate. The baby, she said, and tears began sliding down her bruised cheeks. I lost the baby. I know. I'm so sorry, Isabella. You didn't answer. Her voice was stronger now, accusation cutting through the pain medication fog. I called you 17 times and you didn't answer. The words hit Dante like bullets, each one finding its mark. I know. There's no excuse. I should have been there. I should have answered. Isabella's eyes closed, more tears escaping. I found out I was pregnant that morning. I was so happy, Dante. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe things could be different. Maybe a baby would bring you back to me. She laughed bitterly, the sound painful. But then I found out about your dinner reservation, about the hotel charges, about Valentina. Dante felt his world crumbling. Isabella, I saw her Instagram. I saw the photos, the hints, the life you were living while I sat alone in our penthouse. How long, Dante? How long have you been with her? He could have lied, could have denied everything, played the outraged husband. But looking at his broken wife, at the pain in her eyes that had nothing to do with physical injuries, he couldn't add more lies to the pile. 6 months? He admitted, the words tasting like ash. Isabella's sob was quiet but devastating. 6 months. While I was trying to save our marriage, you were building a relationship with someone else. It wasn't a relationship. It was just what, Dante? Just sex? Just fun? Just easier than dealing with your actual wife? Her voice rose, then broke on a cough that made her wince in pain. A nurse appeared immediately. Mrs. Moretti, you need to stay calm. Your heart rate is elevated. Please. Isabella said to the nurse, ignoring the pain. I want him to leave. The words hit Dante harder than any physical blow could have. Isabella, please. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You made your choice, Dante. You made it every time you ignored my calls. Every time you chose her over me. Every time you came home late, or didn't come home at all. She looked at him with eyes that held no hope, only exhaustion. I'm tired of being the wife you tolerate instead of the woman you love. I'm tired of waiting for you to remember I exist. I love you, Dante said desperately. Isabella, I love you. I know I haven't shown it. I know I've been a terrible husband, but I love you. No. Isabella's voice was quiet but final. You love the idea of me. You love having a fine, respectable wife who doesn't ask questions and doesn't cause problems. But you don't love me, Dante. Because if you did, you would have answered when I called. The nurse was checking Isabella's monitors, concern creasing her face. Mr. Moretti, I need to ask you to leave. Mrs. Moretti needs to rest. Dante stood frozen, watching his wife turn her face away from him. watching her choose to look at the blank wall rather than meet his eyes. "Isabella, please, go," she whispered. "Just go." He wanted to argue, wanted to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness, wanted to make her understand that he was sorry, that he'd change, that things would be different. But the truth was, he'd had 3 years to change. 3 years to be the husband she deserved, and he'd wasted every single day. So Dante did the one thing Isabella had been asking him to do all along. He left. The hospital corridor was bright with morning sun, nurses and doctors beginning their shifts, the building coming alive with the rhythm of another day. Dante walked through it all like a ghost, seeing nothing, hearing nothing except the echo of Isabella's words. "You made your choice." And he had. Every ignored call, every late night, every lie, they'd all been choices. Choices that had led them here. To his wife lying broken in a hospital bed, having lost their child, having lost her faith in him. Marco was waiting in the lobby, having spent the night coordinating security and tracking down leads. "Boss? How is she?" "Awake." "Asking me to leave." Dante's voice was flat. "She knows about Valentina, knows everything." Marco wisely said nothing. "I need you to increase security on her room," Dante continued, switching into the mode that felt safe. Business, logistics, control. Whoever tried to kill her might try again. 2 men on her door at all times. Trusted men only. No one gets in without my approval. Already done. "I've got Rodriguez and Chen posted now." "Good." Dante pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages he'd been ignoring. "What do we know about the hit?" "Still tracking it down." "But boss, there's something you need to know." I pulled Isabella's credit card statements, just to check if she'd been anywhere unusual before the accident. Somewhere someone might have spotted her, followed her. And? She hasn't used her cards in weeks, except for basic stuff, groceries, gas. But Dante, I also checked her phone records, not just the calls to you. She made one other call yesterday morning, right after the doctor called her about the pregnancy results. Dante's attention sharpened. Who did she call? Her sister. Sophia. The call lasted 3 minutes. Then Sophia called her back an hour later, but Isabella didn't answer. And get this, Sophia called you 4 times yesterday afternoon too, trying to reach you. A cold feeling settled in Dante's gut. Where's Sophia now? At her apartment in Coral Gables. Want me to bring her in? No. I'll go myself. If Isabella told her about the pregnancy, about Valentina, Sophia might know something about her state of mind before the accident, might know if she mentioned anything suspicious. It was weak reasoning, and they both knew it. But Dante needed to do something, needed to feel like he was making progress on finding whoever had hurt Isabella. Because if he stopped moving, stopped investigating, stopped focusing on external enemies, he'd have to face the internal truth that the real enemy, the person who'd hurt Isabella most, was him. Sophia Rodriguez lived in a modest apartment complex, a stark contrast to the Moretti penthouse. Dante knocked on her door at 8 a.m., knowing she'd be awake. Sophia worked as a teacher, and school started early. The door opened, and Sophia's face went from sleepy confusion to sharp anger the instant she recognized him. You have some nerve showing up here, she said, her voice cold. Where were you yesterday when my sister was calling you? Where were you when she needed you? Can I come in? I need to talk to you about Isabella. I have nothing to say to you. Sophia started to close the door, but Dante put his hand against it. Please. Someone tried to kill her. I need to know if she told you anything that might help me figure out who. That gave Sophia pause. Tried to kill her? The police said it was an accident. The police are wrong. It was a professional hit, and I need to know if Isabella mentioned anyone suspicious. Anyone who might have been following her. Anything. Sophia studied his face, distrust warring with concern for her sister. Finally, she stepped back and let him in. The apartment was small but warm, filled with photos and plants, and the kind of lived-in comfort the Moretti penthouse lacked. On the coffee table, Dante spotted a framed photo of Isabella from before their marriage, younger, smiling, full of life. He barely recognized the woman in the picture. Isabella called me yesterday morning, Sophia said, standing with her arms crossed defensively. She was crying. She said she was pregnant, and that she'd found out you were having an affair. The words, spoken out loud by someone else, sounded even worse than when Isabella had said them. She told me she was going to confront you, Sophia continued. She was going to drive to your hotel, tell you about the baby, and make you choose between her and your mistress. Dante's blood ran cold. She was coming to the Mondrian? That's what she said. But then when I called her back an hour later to make sure she was okay, she didn't answer. I tried you 4 times, hoping you'd at least tell me where she was, but you ignored me too. Sophia took a step toward him, jabbing her finger at his chest. So no, Dante, I don't know who tried to kill my sister. But I do know that her husband was too busy fucking another woman to protect her when she needed him most. The accusation hit its mark, but Dante pushed past the guilt. What time did you last talk to her? Around 11:30. Why? Because she was hit at 2 p.m., which means she spent 2.5 hours between deciding to confront me and ending up at that intersection. Where was she during that time? Sophia's anger faded slightly as the implication sank in. You think she went somewhere? Talked to someone? I think if she was upset enough to confront me, she might have been upset enough to talk to someone else first. A friend, a therapist, anyone she trusted. Isabella didn't really have friends anymore, Sophia said quietly. You isolated her so completely that I'm basically the only person she talks to besides your household staff. The words were another indictment, but they also confirmed what Dante had suspected. Isabella's world had become so small, so controlled, that there were very few places she could have gone, very few people she could have talked to, which meant very few opportunities for someone to target her. Unless, does Isabella have any regular appointments? Dante asked. Doctor, salon, anywhere she goes predictably? Sophia thought for a moment. She goes to the same coffee shop every Wednesday. That place in Coconut Grove near... She stopped, her eyes widening. Near where she had the accident. Dante's mind raced. What coffee shop? Café Alma. She likes it because it's quiet and the owner doesn't treat her like a mafia wife. She goes there to read, to get out of the penthouse. Every Wednesday? Like clockwork. She's been going there for over a year, which meant anyone watching Isabella would know her patterns, would know where to find her on a Wednesday afternoon, would know the route she'd take from Brickell to Coconut Grove. Dante pulled out his phone and called Marco. I need you to check out a place called Café Alma in Coconut Grove. Pull their security footage from yesterday. I want to know if Isabella was there and if anyone was watching her. On it, Marco said, and the line went dead. Dante turned back to Sophia. When Isabella wakes up when she's strong enough, she's going to need family. She's going to need you. She's always needed me, Dante. She's just been too isolated to reach out. Sophia's expression softened slightly. Is she really okay? They wouldn't tell me much at the hospital. She survived the surgery. But Dante's voice caught. She lost the baby. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God. Isabella must be devastated. She wanted a child so badly. I know. The guilt was crushing now. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Do you think Isabella would leave me? After this? Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Do you deserve for her to stay? The question hung between them, unanswerable. No, Dante said finally. I don't. But I'm asking anyway, because I need to know if she leaves. Where would she go? Who would she turn to? Why? So you can control that too? So you can make sure she has nowhere to run? So I can protect her. Dante's voice was steel. Someone tried to kill my wife. Until I find out who and why, she's in danger. And whether she wants me around or not, I'm not going to let anyone hurt her again. Sophia studied his face, searching for something. You really care, don't you? Or maybe you just don't like losing what you consider yours. Both were true, and Dante knew it. But caring and possessing weren't mutually exclusive in his world. He'd been raised to protect what was his, to never show weakness, to maintain control at all costs. Isabella was his wife, his responsibility. His what? His possession? His burden? Or his love? The answer should have been obvious, but Dante was finding that 3 years of taking her for granted had blurred the lines between duty and desire, between protection and control. I need her safe, he said finally. That's all that matters right now. Can you help me or not? Sophia sighed. If Isabella leaves you, she'll come to me, and I'll help her rebuild her life away from your world. But Dante, she met his eyes. If you really love her, you'll let her go. You'll let her have a life that isn't about waiting for a man who doesn't have time for her. The words stung because they were true. Dante had made Isabella wait for 3 years, wait for attention, wait for affection, wait for him to remember she existed. And yesterday, she'd waited for him to answer her calls while she bled in a crushed Mercedes, waited for him to save her when he'd been too busy with his mistress to care. He was done making her wait. "Thank you for your time," Dante said, moving toward the door. "I'll have someone contact you when Isabella's ready for visitors." "Dante," Sophia called as he reached the doorway. "Whatever you're planning to do to whoever hurt her, don't let Isabella see that side of you. She's seen enough darkness." Dante nodded and left, knowing that Sophia's advice was well meant but impossible to follow. Because when he found whoever had tried to kill Isabella, he was going to unleash every bit of darkness he possessed, and he was going to make sure they understood what happened when you touched a Moretti wife. Even if that wife was considering leaving him. Marco called while Dante was driving back to the hospital. "Boss, you need to see this. I'm sending you the security footage from Cafe Alma." Dante pulled over on the side of Brickell Avenue, his hands tight on the steering wheel as he waited for the video file to load on his phone. When it finally appeared, he watched in silence as the timestamp showed yesterday. 12:47 p.m. Isabella appeared on screen, walking into the small coffee shop. Even through the grainy footage, Dante could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept touching her stomach, a protective gesture over the baby she'd just discovered. His baby. Their baby. She ordered something at the counter, then sat at a table near the window. For several minutes, she just stared at her phone, and Dante knew with sick certainty that she was looking at evidence of his betrayal. The hotel charges, the Instagram posts, the dinner reservations that weren't for her. Then, at 1:03 p.m., a man entered the frame. Dante's entire body went rigid. The man was tall, well-dressed, wearing sunglasses indoors. He didn't order anything, didn't pretend to be a customer. He simply stood near the door, watching Isabella. And when she finally stood to leave at 1:15 p.m., he followed her out. "Did you get a clear shot of his face?" Dante asked Marco, his voice deadly calm. "Working on it. I've got our tech guy cleaning up the image now. But Dante, that's not all. I pulled traffic camera footage from the route between Cafe Alma and where Isabella was hit. That same guy followed her in a black sedan, stayed 3 cars back, professional tail. And when she stopped at that intersection when she was sitting there not moving, he called someone. I can see him on the phone right before the SUV came around the corner. So it was coordinated. Someone had been following Isabella, tracking her movements, and when the moment was right, they'd called in the hit. Send me everything you have, Dante said. And Marco, I want to know who this guy is by the end of the day. Already running facial recognition through our databases. If he's connected to any of the families, we'll know soon. Dante ended the call and sat in his car, the Miami sun beating down through the windshield. Someone had been following his wife, had watched her discover her pregnancy, had watched her deal with the emotional devastation of learning about his affair, had waited for the perfect moment when she was distracted and vulnerable. And then they'd tried to kill her. The rage that flooded through Dante was cold and calculated. This wasn't just business anymore. This wasn't about territory or money or power. This was personal. Someone had hurt Isabella, had killed their unborn child, had taken the one pure thing in Dante's corrupted life and tried to destroy it, and he was going to make them pay. When Dante returned to the hospital, he found Isabella's room surrounded by his men, Rodriguez and Chen, at the door, 2 more at the nurse's station, another watching the elevator. Overkill maybe, but Dante wasn't taking any more chances. She awake? He asked Rodriguez. Yeah, but boss, her sister's in there. Sophia arrived about 20 minutes ago. They asked not to be disturbed. Dante could hear their voices through the door, Sophia's angry tone mixing with Isabella's quieter responses. He shouldn't eavesdrop, should give them privacy. But he needed to know what Isabella was saying, needed to understand what she was thinking. Have to leave him, Sophia was saying. Bella, he's been cheating on you for 6 months. 6 months? While you were home alone, while you were trying to save your marriage. I know. Isabella's voice was hoarse, exhausted. I know all of that, Sophia. But it's not that simple. It is that simple. You walk away. You file for divorce. You start over. And where? Do what? Everything I have is because of Dante. The penthouse, the money, the security. Without him, I have nothing. You have yourself, you have your degree, you have A degree I never used because Dante wanted me home. No job experience because being his wife was supposed to be my job. No friends because he isolated me from everyone except you. Isabella's voice cracked. Without him, I have nothing. That's how completely he's controlled my life. Dante closed his eyes, her words hitting harder than any physical blow. Protection had become imprisonment, and he'd been too blind to see it. Then we'll figure it out together, Sophia said firmly. You can stay with me. We'll get you a job, maybe go back to school. And when Dante's enemies find out I've left him, when they realize I'm vulnerable. Isabella's laugh was bitter. Someone just tried to kill me, Sophia. This isn't about whether I want to leave. It's about whether I can survive leaving. The words made Dante's decision for him. He knocked once, then pushed open the door without waiting for permission. Both women looked up, Sophia's expression immediately hostile, Isabella's carefully blank. I need to speak with my wife, Dante said. Alone. No, Sophia stood, positioning herself between Dante and Isabella's bed. You don't get to order us around. You don't get to, Sophia. Isabella's voice was quiet but firm. It's okay. Give us a few minutes, Bella. Please. Sophia looked between them, clearly torn. Finally, she squeezed Isabella's hand and moved toward the door. But as she passed Dante, she stopped and lowered her voice so only he could hear. If you hurt her again, I don't care how powerful you are. I'll find a way to make you pay. Dante had no doubt she meant it. When the door closed behind Sophia, silence filled the room. Isabella wouldn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the window where Miami's skyline stretched into the distance. In the harsh hospital light, her injuries were even more visible, the bruises darkening, the cuts and abrasions standing out against her pale skin. She looked fragile, broken. And it was his fault. I know who did this, Dante said finally. Or at least, I'm close to knowing. There was a man following you yesterday, from the coffee shop to the intersection. He made a call right before the SUV hit you. It was coordinated. Isabella's expression didn't change. Why are you telling me this? Because whoever tried to kill you is still out there, and until I find them. You'll what, Dante? Kill them? Make them disappear? The emptiness in her eyes was worse than anger. I'm tired of living in a world where the solution to everything is more blood. This isn't about violence. It's about protecting you. No, it's about control. It's always been about control. You controlled who I saw, where I went, what I knew about your life. And now someone tried to kill me, and your solution is more control, more guards, more surveillance, more of the same cage you've kept me in for 3 years. Isabella, I want a divorce. The words dropped between them like a bomb. Dante felt the floor tilt beneath him. What? You heard me. I want a divorce, Dante. I want out of this marriage, out of this life, out of this cage you've built around me. Tears were sliding down her face now, but her voice remained steady. I lost our baby yesterday. And you know what the worst part is? Part of me is relieved. Because bringing a child into this world, into your world, would have been cruel. Don't say that. Dante moved closer to the bed, his hands clenched at his sides. Don't say you're relieved our baby died. I'm not relieved our baby died, Isabella said, her voice breaking. I'm devastated. I wanted that baby more than anything. But I'm relieved that now there's nothing tying me to you anymore. No pregnancy to use as leverage, no child to weaponize. Just a failed marriage that we can finally end. The words cut deeper than any knife could have. Isabella, please. I know I've made mistakes. Mistakes? Her laugh was harsh. Dante, mistakes are forgetting an anniversary or missing a dinner. What you did, the lies, the cheating, the isolation, those aren't mistakes. Those are choices. Choices you made every single day for 3 years. I'll change. I'll be better. No. Isabella held up her hand, the IV line swaying with the movement. I've heard these promises before. Every time I tried to talk to you about our marriage, you'd promise to do better, promise to come home earlier, promise to pay more attention, and for maybe a week you would. Then it would go back to the same pattern, the same neglect, the same indifference. This time is different. Why? Because I almost died? Because someone tried to kill me and suddenly you remember you have a wife? Isabella shook her head. That's not love, Dante. That's guilt. That's possessiveness. That's you being angry someone tried to take your property. You're not my property, Dante said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. In his world, wives were possessions, status symbols, assets to be protected and controlled. Then let me go. Isabella's voice was barely a whisper now. If I'm not your property, if you really care about me at all, let me go. Let me have a life where I'm not constantly waiting for you to remember I exist, where I'm not competing with your business and your mistresses for scraps of attention. Dante wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he did love her, that things would be different. But looking at her now broken and bleeding because he'd been too distracted to protect her, too selfish to answer her calls, he realized Sophia had been right. If he really loved Isabella, he'd let her go. But Dante Moretti had never been good at letting go of what was his. No, he said finally. I won't give you a divorce. Isabella's eyes widened. You can't stop me from filing. I can make it take years. I can tie it up in legal battles until you're too exhausted to fight. I can make sure no lawyer in Miami will take your case. Dante's voice was cold now, falling into the pattern that had always served him control through power. You want to leave? Fine. But you'll leave with nothing. No money, no security, no protection from the people who just tried to kill you. So that's it? Isabella's voice shook with rage. That's your answer? Threats and intimidation? This is exactly why I need to leave, Dante. Because you don't see me as a person. You see me as something to possess and control. I see you as my wife, as someone I swore to protect. And I'm not going to fail at that again. You've already failed. Isabella's shout made her wince in pain, her hand going to her bandaged ribs. You failed when you ignored my calls. You failed when you chose your mistress over me. You failed when you let someone get close enough to try to kill me. The only thing you haven't failed at is making me miserable. The words hung in the air between them, brutal and honest. Dante wanted to rage, to argue, to make her understand that he was trying to protect her, but deep down, he knew she was right. He had failed her in every way that mattered. I'm sorry, he said finally, the words feeling inadequate. I'm sorry for all of it, for the cheating, for the neglect, for making you feel alone in your own marriage. I'm sorry I didn't answer your calls. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry, his voice cracked. I'm sorry about our baby. Isabella's tears fell faster now. Your apology doesn't change anything, Dante. Sorry doesn't bring back our baby. Sorry doesn't undo 6 months of betrayal. Sorry doesn't give me back the 3 years I wasted loving a man who didn't love me back. I do love you. No, Isabella said quietly. You love the idea of me. You love having a beautiful, obedient wife who doesn't ask questions. But you don't love me the real me, with needs and feelings and dreams. Because if you did, you would have fought for our marriage instead of finding comfort in another woman's bed. Before Dante could respond, Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. Boss, we have a problem. The facial recognition came back on the guy who was following Isabella. He glanced at Isabella, clearly uncomfortable discussing this in front of her. We need to talk. Now. Dante looked between Marco and Isabella, torn. He needed to know who'd ordered the hit on his wife. But leaving now, leaving her angry and hurt, and convinced he didn't love her, felt wrong. Go, Isabella said, turning her face away. It's what you do best anyway. Leaving when things get difficult. The accusation stung because it was true. Dante had spent 3 years leaving her alone at home, leaving conversations unfinished, leaving their marriage to slowly die from neglect. We're not done with this conversation, he said. Yes, we are. Isabella's voice was final. When I'm discharged from this hospital, I'm going to stay with Sophia. I'm going to file for divorce, and I'm going to start building a life that doesn't revolve around waiting for you. You can fight it if you want. You can make it ugly and expensive and drawn out. But eventually, you're going to have to accept that our marriage is over. Dante wanted to argue more, wanted to make her understand that he couldn't just let her go. But Marco was waiting, and whoever had tried to kill Isabella was still out there, still a threat. This isn't over, Dante said as he moved toward the door. Yes, Isabella whispered. It is. In the hallway, Marco pulled up an image on his tablet. The guy following Isabella, his name is Victor Reyes. He's a freelance contractor, works for whoever pays best, usually handles surveillance and intelligence gathering. Who hired him? Marco's expression darkened. That's the problem, boss. According to our contacts, Victor was hired by Paulo Castellano. Your cousin. The name hit Dante like a physical blow. Paulo. His father's nephew, a man Dante had grown up with, had trusted with sensitive information about the family business. A man who'd always been ambitious, but had never seemed dangerous. Why would Paulo target Isabella? We're still piecing it together, but here's what we know. Marco pulled up more files. Paulo's been quietly building alliances with the Colombians and the Russians, the same families you've been at odds with. 3 weeks ago, he approached them with a proposal. Help him take over your territory, and he'd give them more favorable terms than you ever would. And they agreed? They were interested. But they wanted proof Paulo could actually deliver, proof that you were vulnerable. So Paulo, Marco paused, his jaw tight. He orchestrated the hit on Isabella. His thinking was that if she died, you'd be distracted, emotional, weakened. The families would see you as vulnerable, and Paulo could move in to take over while you were grieving. Dante's vision went red. Paulo had ordered the hit on Isabella. His own cousin had tried to kill his wife to stage a power play. Where is he? Dante's voice was dangerously quiet. We're tracking him now. He's been laying low since the hit, probably waiting to see if Isabella survives before making his next move. I want him found. Today. And Marco, Dante met his second-in-command's eyes. When we find him, I want him alive. I have questions, and I'm going to enjoy hearing him answer them. Marco nodded grimly. What about Isabella? Does she need to know it was family? That was the question, wasn't it? Should Dante tell his wife that his own blood had tried to kill her? Would it make things better or worse? Probably worse. Because it would just confirm what Isabella already believed, that Dante's world was too violent, too dangerous, too toxic for her to survive in. Not yet, Dante said. Not until I've dealt with Paulo. But double the security on her room. If Paulo realizes we've figured out his plan, he might try again. Already done. But boss, even with security, once Isabella leaves the hospital, she's vulnerable. If she goes to Sophia's apartment, if she files for divorce and moves out, Paulo or anyone else could get to her easily. She's not going to Sophia's apartment. Dante's voice was steel. No matter what she says, no matter what she wants, I'm not letting her walk out of my protection until this threat is neutralized. And if she fights you on it? Then Dante would do what he always did. He'd control the situation. Lock her in the penthouse if necessary, post guards at every exit, make it impossible for her to leave. The fact that this was exactly what Isabella had accused him of building a cage, treating her like a possession to be controlled rather than a person to be loved, didn't escape him. But keeping her alive mattered more than keeping her happy, didn't it? It took Marco's team 6 hours to locate Paulo. He was hiding in a warehouse near the port, the same warehouse Isabella had been photographed near in those doctored images months ago. The irony wasn't lost on Dante. His cousin had been planning this betrayal for a long time, carefully constructing a narrative of Isabella's involvement in the business to provide cover for his own activities. Dante arrived at the warehouse with Marco and 4 of his most trusted men. The sun was setting, painting the Miami sky in shades of blood orange and purple. Fitting, Dante thought, for what was about to happen. Inside the warehouse, Paulo was waiting. Or more accurately, Paulo was tied to a chair, having been grabbed by Dante's men an hour ago. His face was already bloody from the initial interrogation, one eye swollen shut, his lip split. He looked up when Dante entered, and something like relief crossed his face. Dante, thank God. Tell these idiots there's been a mistake. I didn't. Dante's fist connected with Paulo's jaw, snapping his head back. The relief vanished, replaced by fear. You tried to kill my wife, Dante said quietly. You hired Victor Reyes to follow her, to track her movements. And when the moment was right, when she was distracted and vulnerable, you had someone run her off the road. No, another punch, this one to the ribs. Paulo's cry of pain echoed in the empty warehouse. Don't lie to me, cousin. We have the phone records. We have Victor's testimony, and yes, he talked, very enthusiastically once we explained the alternative. We have the money trail from your accounts to the man who drove the SUV. We have everything. Paulo sagged in the chair, blood dripping from his mouth. It wasn't personal, Dante. It was just business. You were getting soft, distracted. The families were losing confidence. I was just what? Just trying to murder my pregnant wife to stage a coup? Dante's voice rose. She lost our baby. Paulo. Isabella lost our baby because of you. For the first time, Something like genuine surprise crossed Paulo's face. She was pregnant? I didn't know. The intelligence I had didn't mention. Of course you didn't know, because you were so busy planning to kill her that you didn't bother to learn anything about her. Dante grabbed Paulo by the throat, squeezing. She was 6 weeks pregnant. 6 weeks. And your hit killed my child. Paulo gasped for air, his face turning red. Dante, please, I didn't know. Dante released him, letting Paulo slump forward, coughing. It doesn't matter if you knew, Dante said coldly. You still ordered the hit. You still tried to kill my wife. You still betrayed your own family for power. What are you going to do? Paulo's voice was barely a whisper. Good question. What was Dante going to do? In the old days, the answer would have been simple. Paulo would disappear. His body would be weighted down and dropped in the ocean, never to be found. It was how the Moretti family had always handled betrayal, swift, brutal, final. But Dante kept hearing Isabella's voice. I'm so tired of the violence. So tired of living in a world where the solution to everything is more blood. She'd been right about so many things. Right about him controlling her, isolating her, treating her like a possession. Right about him failing as a husband and as a partner. Was she also right about the violence? Dante looked at his cousin, bloody, beaten, terrified, and realized something. Killing Paulo wouldn't bring back his baby, wouldn't heal Isabella's injuries, wouldn't fix his marriage or undo the betrayal. It would just be more violence in a life already drowning in it. Marco, Dante said, his voice weary. Call Detective Ramirez. Tell her we have the person responsible for Isabella's hit and run. Gift wrapped and ready for arrest. Marco's eyebrows shot up. Boss? You're turning him over to the police? Yes. Dante looked at Paulo one last time. Let the legal system handle this. Let him spend the next 20 years in prison thinking about what he did. That's punishment enough. Dante, Paulo's voice was pleading now. You can't be serious. I'm family. I'm blood. You can't just hand me over to the cops. You stopped being family the moment you targeted my wife, Dante said coldly. And Paulo? When you get to prison, when you're alone and scared and realizing your life is over, I want you to remember this. I let you live. I could have killed you, could have made you disappear, could have done exactly what you expected, but I didn't. Because my wife was right, there's been enough violence, enough blood. And I'm done adding to it. He turned and walked toward the warehouse exit, Marco falling into step beside him. What changed? Marco asked quietly. Last week, you would have killed him without a second thought. Last week, I thought controlling everything through force was the only way to protect what was mine, Dante said. But Isabella showed me that sometimes the things we do to protect people actually destroy them. Sometimes violence isn't the answer. Sometimes you have to choose a different path, even if that path was harder, even if it meant showing weakness, even if it meant changing everything about who he'd been for the past 34 years. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story. Epilogue. 6 months later, Isabella sat in the small gallery in Wynwood, surrounded by paintings she'd created over the past half-year. Bright colors, bold strokes, images of caged birds breaking free and flying toward the sun. Her therapist had suggested art as a way to process trauma, and Isabella had discovered she had a talent for it. More than that, she'd discovered she had a voice. The opening night of her first exhibition had drawn a decent crowd, friends she'd made in her art class, Sophia and her mother, even a few local art critics. But there was one person notably absent, Dante. They'd been separated for 6 months now. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, though more slowly than Isabella had hoped. Dante hadn't fought it the way he'd threatened to. Instead, he'd agreed to a generous settlement, had moved out of the penthouse so she could stay there until the divorce was finalized, had even paid for her art classes and therapy. He'd kept his promise about changing, even if that change had come too late to save their marriage. They rarely saw each other now. The only contact they had was through lawyers, except for one unexpected development. Once a week, Dante sent her flowers. Not expensive arrangements from luxury florists, but simple bouquets of wildflowers with handwritten notes. Never anything dramatic, just thinking of you, hope you're well, proud of what you're building. Isabella didn't know what to do with these gestures. Part of her wanted to throw the flowers away, to tell him to stop, to maintain the clean break she'd been working so hard to achieve. But another part, a part she didn't like to acknowledge, appreciated them. Appreciated knowing that somewhere in Miami, Dante was thinking about her. That somewhere in his world of violence and control, he'd made space to remember she existed. "Beautiful work," a voice said behind her. Isabella turned to find Marcus Chen, one of Dante's former bodyguards, studying her painting of a woman breaking free from chains. He was in civilian clothes now, no longer working for the Moretti family. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "Dante asked me to deliver something." He held out an envelope. "He wanted to come himself, but he thought you might not want him here. Didn't want to make you uncomfortable on your big night." The consideration, the awareness that his presence might ruin her evening, was so different from the old Dante that Isabella didn't know what to think. She took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a check not for an unreasonable amount, but enough to cover several months of rent if she decided to leave the penthouse. And a note, in Dante's handwriting. "Isabella, I'm proud of you for finding your voice, for building something that's entirely yours. You were right about everything I did cage you, control you, treat you like a possession instead of a person I loved. I can't undo the past, can't bring back our baby or give you back the years I wasted. But I can tell you that you changed me. You showed me that strength isn't about control, that protection isn't about imprisonment, that love isn't about possession. I've left the business, turned everything over to Marco and walked away. I'm working with a therapist now, trying to figure out who Dante Moretti is when he's not a mafia boss, trying to become someone worthy of a second chance. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking you to know that loving you, really loving you, not the controlled version I tried to keep you, has taught me what it means to be human. Congratulations on your exhibition, on your freedom, on becoming the woman you were always meant to be. All my love." Dante. Isabella read the note 3 times, tears blurring her vision. Dante had left the business, had walked away from the violence and power that had defined him, had chosen to change, not to win her back, but because she'd shown him a different way to live. "Is he?" Isabella looked up at Marcus. "Is he really okay?" Marcus smiled slightly. "He's different, quieter, less angry. He volunteers at a youth center now, if you can believe it, trying to keep kids out of the life he lived. It's strange seeing him like that, gentle, patient, but I think he's happier, or at least, less miserable." Isabella folded the note carefully, her heart a complicated mess of emotions. She'd meant it when she'd said their marriage was over. She wasn't naive enough to think one grand gesture could undo years of neglect and betrayal. But maybe there was something beautiful in knowing that their time together, painful as it had been, had changed them both. She'd found her strength, her voice, her ability to exist outside of his shadow. And he'd found his humanity, his capacity for change, his understanding that love required freedom, not control. They'd both lost so much: their marriage, their baby, the future they'd once imagined. But they'd also gained something precious, the chance to become who they were truly meant to be. "Tell him thank you," Isabella said finally, "for the note, for understanding, she paused, searching for the right words, "for letting me go." Marcus nodded. "He'll be glad to hear it." After he left, Isabella stood alone in her gallery, surrounded by images of freedom and transformation. Through the window, she could see Miami's everyday, lights stretching into the distance, a city full of possibilities. Somewhere out there, Dante was building a new life. And here, in this gallery filled with her art, Isabella was building one too. They'd never be together again. Too much had happened, too much pain had been inflicted, but perhaps that was okay. Perhaps some love stories weren't meant to have traditional happy endings. Perhaps sometimes, the greatest act of love was letting someone go, so they could finally learn to fly. Isabella touched her stomach, the place where their baby had briefly existed, and whispered a quiet goodbye to the child they'd lost, to the marriage they'd destroyed, to the people they used to be. And then she turned back to her paintings, to her future, to the life she was building one brushstroke at a time, free at last. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one.